I used to believe that silence meant peace, that when words stopped, conflict ended. I never imagined that silence could be weaponized, not to heal, but to punish. Not to create space, but to create fear. I didn't know that the absence of sound could become the loudest form of control I would ever experience. He thought he understood his mind, but what he didn't know was that a resource existed that could help him rebuild his life. You'll find it in the description and comments. At the time, I didn't know I was entering a psychological battlefield. I only knew that someone I cared about had begun to disappear whenever I did something wrong. It didn't start with cruelty. It started with distance. A delayed reply, a cold look, a conversation that ended abruptly. When I asked what was wrong, I was met with nothing. No explanation, no resolution, just absence. And that absence was not neutral. It was heavy, accusatory, suffocating. I found myself replaying every word I had said, searching for the moment I must have failed. Have you ever felt guilty without being told what you did? Soon, the pattern became clear. Whenever I set a boundary, expressed a need, or questioned something that didn't feel right, the silence arrived. Days would pass without acknowledgement. Messages would go unread. My existence felt erased, not because I didn't matter, but because I had displeased. And in that emotional vacuum, I began negotiating with myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe if I just apologize, it will stop. That is the power of punitive silence. It does not argue. It does not explain. It simply withdraws, and in doing so, forces the other person to fill the void with self-blame. I wasn't being yelled at. I wasn't being insulted. I was being ignored, and that hurt more than any words ever could. Because the message was clear, connection was conditional. The psychological toll was relentless. I became hyper-aware of my behavior. I measured my words before speaking. I avoided topics that might trigger withdrawal. I learned to anticipate their moods, to adapt, to minimize myself in the hope of restoring contact. My mind was no longer mine. It was constantly calculating how to avoid abandonment. Isn't it terrifying how control can exist without a single sentence? The breaking point came when I realized that I was no longer afraid of losing them. I was afraid of being erased, of becoming invisible, of not mattering at all. And in that moment of clarity, I asked myself a question that cut through everything. Is this love? Or is this punishment disguised as distance? The answer was undeniable. Silence was not a boundary. It was a tactic. When I finally confronted it, there was no accountability. No empathy, only deflection. I just need space. You're overreacting. You're too needy. The focus shifted from the harm of the silence to my reaction to it. And that is when I understood punitive silence is not about self-care. It is about power. It is about forcing compliance without confrontation. It is emotional control in its quietest, most corrosive form. Walking away from that dynamic was not immediate. I had to unlearn the belief that love is something you earn by becoming smaller. I had to accept that healthy distance comes with communication, not disappearance. That space can be healing, but abandonment used as leverage is abuse. I began setting boundaries that did not depend on their response. I stopped chasing silence. I stopped apologizing for existing. And slowly my nervous system began to breathe again. Rebuilding after emotional neglect is about reclaiming your voice, even when no one is listening. I asked myself hard questions. Why did I tolerate being ignored? Why did I equate presence with worth? Why did I accept conditional connection as normal? And instead of judging myself, I chose understanding. Because when you have been trained to fear abandonment, silence becomes a threat, and you will do anything to make it stop. Today, I recognize the signs. The sudden withdrawal after conflict, the refusal to engage, the use of absence to force guilt, obedience, or emotional dependence. I no longer chase closure from people who communicate through disappearance. I understand now that real connection does not require me to beg for basic acknowledgement. Love does not manage to teach you a lesson. At the end of his journey, he discovered guidance and a resource that helped him face anxiety and rebuild his life. You can access it too. The link is in the description and comments. Healing is not about making the silence end. It is about choosing not to live in a world where silence is used to control you. And when you finally stop fearing the absence of someone who only offered conditional presence, something extraordinary happens. Your voice returns, and so does your life. True freedom begins in the mind, and only then appears in life. If this story resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and continue this journey with us as we uncover toxic minds and rebuild stronger ones together.